BSN student at the UBC School of Nursing in the undergraduate program. His experience as a research assistant for the Still Here Project's Queer Men Living with HIV study has fueled his interest in how social determinants of health impact the LGBTQ communities. Over to you.
So thanks for the introduction. Still Here is an ongoing art and research project aimed at breaking the silence and stimulating conversation about the issues of suicide. We work with LGBTQ2S+ people affected by suicide to take photographs and encourage them to share their experiences and their stories. Their work is showcased in exhibits, presentations, community forums, online exhibitions, and sometimes even publications, which provide spaces and inspiration for people to share their own stories and discuss prevention. In BC, nearly 1 in 12 people living with HIV deaths between 1996 and 2010 were from suicide, and suicide remains 3 times higher among people living with HIV compared to the general population. Among those living with HIV and AIDS, over half of those individuals in BC alone are those who are gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. Independent of their HIV status, GBMSM are at a greater risk of suicide compared to the heterosexual population. And based on reviews of literature, are even 4 times more likely than heterosexual men to attempt suicide in their lifetime. So this year we focused on interviews with gay and bisexual men living with HIV and the stigmas placed on them within society. I had the pleasure of interviewing 22 guys and conducting semi-structured qualitative interviews through Photo Voice in order to investigate these stigmas. Through Still Here, we chose to use Photo Voice as a way to address health inequities faced by gay and bisexual men living with HIV. Photo Voice has been used by researchers as a way to empower participants throughout the interview process, and it's also been a great tool to use in order to navigate sensitive topics and complex issues through photo expression of one's experiences. So for example, I found when interviewing men for this project, many of which who had found the project to be slightly stressful, but also a very positive experience. For many of them, having the space to talk about their experiences of suicide allowed them to be honest with themselves and kind of give them the space to self-reflect. For many of them, it was also the first opportunity they had to talk about their mental health struggles, and in a sense, it was very therapeutic for individuals to begin the process of healing. It's interesting as well because there's also a dynamic that plays out through the life course history perspective. As times change, we tend to grow with it and assume that stigma changes accordingly. However, in some of these cases, men were faced with different forms of prejudice and discrimination as they got older. Ageism in the queer community is the erasure of status and co-ops with many challenges that presents with being queer. As research and innovation developed, we saw new advances in HIV treatments, and people were no longer dying of AIDS-related diseases, but the stigma was still there. So even with new campaigns such as undetectable equals untransmittable or U equals U, there's still a lot of fear around HIV. Photo Voice can also be used to encourage community engagement and create unique knowledge translation opportunities to drive social change. With that in mind, I think it's important to also acknowledge the other ethical implications of Photo Voice in suicide research. For example, as other researchers have identified, and a past colleague has also talked about, Jen Creighton, the reproduction of these images for an event such as this carries with it issues of consent and copyright. As well, vicarious trauma may also manifest in unexpected ways as participant-produced images can have triggering responses towards others' mental health. With respect to the photos that were created through the research project, we decided to hold a community-based event in the form of a photo exhibit Many of the photos that you see here in the slides today were showcased in a photo exhibit that was held back in October. It was actually held here in Vancouver in downtown Chinatown. We did it for a weekend, and when I say weekend, I use this term very loosely because I'm including a Thursday and a Friday. So over the 4-day event, we saw over 120 people in attendance. And coincidentally, the exhibit also carries the same name as the presentation, so I think I titled it Here to Stay. So I decided to do a recycling of that, so hopefully there are no issues with copyright there. With previous cohorts, Still Here has also published photo books using photos that research participants have consented for media use. This year, however, we felt that our project reach would be better served in a community-based publication. So we decided to include works from our HIV-positive men's cohort in the November issue of Positive Living magazine, Positive Living BC's magazine, which is projected to reach over 6,000 people, not only in BC, but across Canada. Still Here is also on social media. So we have a social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. We also have our own website. So if you are curious about the past work that previous cohorts have done, you can always browse our online gallery. So it's www.stillhereproject.ca. And with that,